Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we have an interesting rumor coming about for the 2026 Minnesota governor election, where Mike Lindell, who you may know better as the MyPillow guy, is reportedly considering running for governor of Minnesota against Tim Walz. So let's break this all down. Mike Lindell, the founder and CEO of MyPillow, has said he's considering running for governor of Minnesota in 2026. Lindell is a prominent figure in the MAGA movement and a longtime supporter of President Donald Trump. In addition to running MyPillow, Lindell hosts the website Frank Speech, a platform for conservative pundits, and the streaming and broadcast platform Lindell TV. Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, has served as governor of Minnesota since 2019. He is eligible to run for a third term, but has not yet announced whether he will do so. The Democrat is reportedly eyeing a third term following confirmation in February that he would not run for the state's open Senate seat in 2026. On a recent episode of The Mike Lindell Show, which airs on Lindell TV, the MyPillow CEO said, "I live here in Minnesota. Everywhere I go, nobody wants Tim Walz." He said he was doing due diligence as he considered entering the race and teased bigger announcements to come. Walz comfortably won Minnesota's gubernatorial elections in 2018 and 2022, and according to Real Clear Politics, has a 42.5% favorability rating. Prior to becoming governor, Walz served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 2007 to 2019. Last year, he gained a national profile after then Vice President Kamala Harris chose him as her running mate in November's election. Lindell became a vocal Trump supporter in 2016 and rose to prominence in the MAGA movement while arguing the 2020 election was rigged against the president. In 2024, he was ordered to pay $5 million to computer forensics expert Robert Zeidman after making a public pledge to pay that sum to anyone who could disprove his claim that the 2020 election was rigged in Joe Biden's favor. What the people are saying, Mike Lindell said on Lindell TV, "Right now we have a voice that could be big enough when I do my due diligence and we're going to do polling. We're going to get a couple of different polls to be taken. We're going to be doing all kinds of due diligence. I'm just checking into all of this now." Minnesota Governor Tim Walz wrote on X on January 1st, "Happy New Year, Minnesota. More grateful than ever to have the privilege of serving this great state. Looking forward to the work ahead and making Minnesota the best place to live, work, and raise a family." What happens next? The next Minnesota gubernatorial election is scheduled to take place on November 3rd, 2026. So that's the article. And this is interesting because for the 2026 Minnesota governor's race, right now the only candidate that's expressed interest is Tim Walz. He's expected to make his decision by the summertime of 2025. Obviously, we don't know what he's going to do yet, but I think it's more likely than not he announces he's running for re-election as governor. If he wants to run for president in 2028, he can still run again for governor, win this time, and then run for president in 28. That's not too quick of a turnaround for him to do so, and I think that's probably what happens at this time. If Tim Walz decided not to run, the potential candidate, Angie Craig, U.S. Representative from Minnesota's 2nd District, has said she would run if Walz does not run, and that's the only other confirmed Democratic candidate right now. Walz's Lieutenant Governor, Peggy Flanagan, is running for the U.S. Senate, and Dean Phillips, the former U.S. Representative from Minnesota and candidate for president, has announced he is not running for this race as well. The Republican side, however, things are a lot more wide open. There's only one declared candidate right now, Jeff Johnson, the former St. Cloud City Councilor. File paperwork, it's Phil Parrish, a teacher and perennial candidate, but there's a lot of publicly expressed interest candidates, including Zach Duckworth, a state senator in Minnesota, David Hahn, the former chair of the Minnesota Republican Party and former minority leader of the Minnesota Senate, so he's been around the local GOP politics in Minnesota for the last few years. Mike Lindell, obviously, who I just mentioned, the CEO of MyPillow, who's a very close friend to President Trump. Scott Jensen, the former state senator, he was also the nominee for governor in 2022. Kendall Quayles, the healthcare technology executive, nominee for the 3rd District in 2020 and candidate for governor in 2022. And Jim Schultz, business lawyer and nominee for Attorney General in 2022. Two other potential candidates are Lisa DeMuth, the Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives, and Chris Midell, with Tom Emmer, Pete Stober, and Royce White all saying they would not run for this race. This is where things get interesting because as for the Republican side of things, it's completely wide open. The race itself, the Cook Political Report gives it a likely Democratic ranking. Inside Elections gives it solid Democrat. And I'm going to show you the election history of Minnesota, both at the governor level, presidential level, and Senate level, and how it's gone in recent years. In 2022, what you may remember, 2022 was an interesting midterm year because it was supposed to be a very great night for the Republicans, but ended up being essentially flipped when at the overall governor popular vote, the Democrats ended up winning more votes within governorship, about 0.2%, the state of Minnesota ended up being a likely Democratic win. Walz was able to win re-election with 7.7% over Scott Jensen, the Republican, with the third-party candidate getting about 1.17%. You can go back to the last election in 2018 before that. Tim Walz won election against the Republican by 11.4%. And this one, there was two third-party candidates, one getting 2.65%, another getting 1.03%. So 2 elections in a row, Tim Walz, the Democrat candidate, broke 50% of the vote, won a clear majority. Going back to 2014, which you may remember was a very good night for the Republicans. So they had Republican wins in Maryland, in Illinois, Massachusetts, Maine, a lot of Republican wins. Minnesota still won for the Democrats, with Governor Mark Dayton winning by 5.6% over his Republican opponent, Johnson. Again, 2 third-party candidates taking about 3 to 4% of the vote. And then back in 2010 was the last time it was really close. Mark Dayton won by 0.42%, I assume against Tom Emmer, the now representative, by just 0.42%, with the third-party candidate getting almost 12% of the vote. Probably a big reason why this race was that close. So at the governor's level, Minnesota seems to be around averaging a likely Democratic state. That seems to be where it is. At the Senate level, things are actually, depending on the candidate, even more Democratic. Amy Klobuchar just won by 15.7% in her reelection. This would be a safe Democratic win. You can look at 2020, where Tina Smith, who just announced she would not be running for reelection, so this is an open race in 2026, she won by 5.2%, with a third-party candidate getting 5.92%, another candidate getting 1.78%. So if those third-party candidates weren't there, maybe the margin of victory would have been a little bit larger, but this was still a likely Democratic win. 2018, both of these races were up. Klobuchar won by 24.1%, and the special election for Tina Smith went to her by 10.6%. So at the Senate level, Minnesota is a likely and safe Democratic state as well. At the presidential level, we just saw Minnesota go for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump, with, again, Tim Walz as Harris's running mate by 4.2%. So that was a lean Democratic margin. This is where the Republicans are probably going to feel optimistic here. Harris just broke 50% by about a little under a point. Trump was able to get around 46.68%. I believe that's the highest Republicans gotten in Minnesota since, I want to say, George Bush in the early 2000s. In 2020, Joe Biden won by 7.1%, a likely Democratic win, 52.4 to 45.28. In 2016, when there was a lot of third-party vote split, Clinton won the state by 46.45%, Trump got 44.93%, Johnson 3.84%, and then more vote splitting from there. So 2016 was a special case where a lot of third-party support. Back in 2012, Obama defeated Romney in the state by about 7.7%, another likely Democratic win. 2008, Obama won it by 10.2%, likely Democratic. 2004, John Kerry defeated George W. Bush by 3.5%, lean Democratic. So the last time Minnesota was lean Democratic before 2024 was 2004 with Kerry versus Bush. So Trump has the state of Minnesota at the presidential level, arguably the most Republican it's been since 2004. That's where Republicans are feeling optimistic. The bad news is, even at 4.2%, the state of Minnesota would technically be closer to being a likely Democratic state than being a tilt Democratic state at 4.2%. Minnesota has been pretty consistently around that likely to lean Democratic margin, depending on the race. And it's always been within striking distance. For instance, like, you're going to see it probably be a toss-up state in 2028, along with New Hampshire and Minnesota, but it's probably more likely than not going to go Democratic each time. It's sort of in the same position where, like, the three Rust Belt states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin were in, like, the early 2000s, where maybe they could be within striking distance of going red, but I don't think it's really going to happen until someone like Donald Trump came along in 2016 and was able to push those states over the edge and get them to go red. Minnesota, I think, is a little bit more blue of these states, and I don't think it's going to be really going red in 2026. As for the governor's race, though, on the Republican primary side of things, this is completely wide open. If Mike Lindell does decide to run, there is a pretty good chance that he could get the endorsement of President Donald Trump. Lindell's been a longtime advisor to Trump for a while now, been a friend of his for a while. I was also reading a little bit of Mike Lindell's Wikipedia, and I believe it was in 2022, Lindell was talking about running. I want to see if I can find the exact clip. May not be able to, but Lindell was talking about running for governor of Minnesota, and I think it was either 2018 or 2020. I think it was in 2022, but Lindell ended up deciding on not running, and then that's kind of where it was there. Maybe this time around, though, if he's considering running, Trump would do the endorsement to him because he's a friend, and maybe that would potentially help clear the Republican primary a bit for Lindell. How Lindell would do up against Tim Walz, again, it's Minnesota, the governor level. I think Tim Walz would probably be in a pretty good position to win that race. Mike Lindell, some of his past statements about the 2020 election and such, and his very closeness to Donald Trump in a state like Minnesota, that may actually help him more than it would hurt him, due to the fact that we just saw, even though Donald Trump in 2024, this is the best Trump has ever done, probably the strongest he's ever been politically, we just saw him, he still lost the state of Minnesota by 4.2%. So in 2026, without Donald Trump at the top of the ballot, or top of the ticket, in a 2026 midterm year, which based on history is supposed to be a very strong night for the Democrats, I think right now I would have to start Minnesota out at least as likely Democrat. I think Tim Walz would probably win against Mike Lindell by over 5 points. I'm not sure if he would win by over 15 points, because that seems to be only something Amy Klobuchar has been able to do in Minnesota politics in recent elections. She could win by more than 15 points, but I think Tim Walz versus Mike Lindell will probably end in somewhere in a likely Democratic margin. This doesn't mean the Republicans have zero chance at winning the state of Minnesota for 2026, but I certainly wouldn't give it more than like a 10% chance at winning it. I think Republicans have some battleground opportunities in 2026 at the governor's level, but I really don't think Minnesota is going to be one of them. And if Mike Lindell's the candidate, I don't think that really adds or changes things that makes Minnesota more attainable for the Republicans. For Minnesota to go red in 2026, everything basically needs to be exactly flipped of where it is now. The economy needs to start doing great. Inflation needs to go down a lot. These tariffs, which everyone's freaking out about, probably need to go great and really work out for Minnesota to realistically be in play in 2026, and I just don't see that happening right now. But again, we still got a lot of time until 2026, so we'll see how things develop. But as for Mike Lindell potentially running for governor of Minnesota in 2026, he could probably win a Republican primary. Could he win the general election? That's where I get a little bit more, I don't think so. But leave a comment below, tell me your thoughts. Do you think Mike Lindell running for governor of Minnesota is an interesting idea? Is it a good idea? Do you think he would win the primary? Do you think he could win the general election against Tim Walz? Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me in the comments below what your thoughts are. Also, while you're doing that, make sure to give the video a like and click subscribe to post at least one new video every day that you're not going to want to miss. That'll do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in the next video.